All right, Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be talking about this topic, how to make houses as homes. And certainly, when we talk about this subject, there are a number of different things that we're going to go over in regards to this subject, because we're going to be covering a couple different areas. So think of it as, you're going into these different corners within the subject to answer how to make a house a home. So within, of course, marriage, before you buy a house, you basically look into a number of different things about your house, whether it's its size, its location, just different things that basically that relate to your family. Does it suit you? Does it not suit you? How do we see this home basically fitting our needs? So, and that's the same thing when we talk about how to build homes and how to make our house as a home. Of course, we're going to be talking about number one, what the basis and the basis of marriage is really founded on. So we're looking at, are we talking about romance? Is it love, or is it companionship, or what really is it? So we're talking about first the feelings that this relationship is founded on. And then, of course, after speaking about the relationship, then we're talking about certain descriptions. In other words, we're talking about, just like you talk about a house, we're talking about 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, perhaps maybe square footage. Maybe we're talking about location. We're talking about all these different areas. Same thing. There's a certain description that may suit you and not suit someone else. But of course, that description, Islam doesn't just let you, I guess, just look at yourself, from the way that maybe a therapist would look into it and say, well, yeah, you're this type of personality, therefore, this is what you need. Although I definitely encourage premarital counseling, but there's also that premarital counseling that involves Islam, you as a Muslim, and that you basically have to recognize before you get into marriage that there is a certain type of counseling or certain type of, let's call it that purpose. That what are you trying to make about marriage? Why is marriage necessary for you as a Muslim? What is this supposed to be taking you to? And the list goes on and on. So we will talk about certain descriptions about men, certain descriptions about women, and that these are necessary in order to get to the purpose that was intended by marriage. Then we'll also talk about priorities. There are certain things that you may consider, yes, this is my priority to basically build 1, 2, 3, 4 for my dunya. But there are priorities for my akhirah. What is my priority for my akhirah? And therefore, Islam would come in and set these priorities in a way where, of course, by looking through the lens of Quran and Sunnah, we're trying to look at these priorities for a woman specifically, because the priorities for a man are different than the priorities for a woman. So the priorities for a woman, and that's basically directed at women. So the priorities for a woman, of course, I've got a husband, I've got the household, I've got basically the children. All of these are under my responsibility. So what should I consider as the priority for each and every single one? So we're going to be talking about that in details. The other thing that I had basically seen is the area of the definitions of masculinity and femininehood, and especially in a society that sometimes overthinks and had over thought of so many different definitions, and even had set certain responsibilities. They tried to, I guess, depart and exacerbate themselves away from the traditional system, but they had seen that, well, the traditional systems were actually doing much better than the modern systems. The modern system wanted to separate themselves, and of course, with technology, separating themselves from one another, separating themselves from, of course, their relationship of the contribution within the home, and etc. That basically started getting them into creating new definitions of what makes a female, what is feminine, what is masculine, and of course, then with the postmodern influence, they were completely, I would say, eliminating any differences, and then not only biological differences, but including social differences. And we're talking about all these contributions, and considered that that is more of a cultural impact and cultural influence than actually a difference that really matters, a difference that really plays out in any shape or form in our life. So, of course, we're going to go back to making sure that we understand our definitions right, and not letting these indoctrinations have their influence upon us. We want to go back to Quran and Sunnah, and not necessarily having a traditional influence, but we definitely need the Islamic traditional influence contribute in helping us define these questions on what makes manhood, what makes femalehood or femininehood, what makes these definitions, in order for us to understand, okay, well, this is your definition, and therefore this is why you need to hold on to this principle. This is why you were given this definition in order to play this responsibility, in order to make a functioning home, a stable home, a home of Sakina. So we're going to get into all these different boxes, but I'm not going to go in extremely thorough detailed, because I already have done a couple lectures in that regard. So I'll just go into these pockets and into these areas to kind of speak about it in general. Since we're speaking about family fiqh, it's not enough to just say, well, these are the conditions for a marriage contract. This is what you need to do in terms of having a valid marriage contract, and these are the implications and so forth. But we need to talk about now the fiqh of the marriage, at least in its dynamic when it plays out. So that's why I basically chose to talk and cover this topic. And of course, to start, so I was just giving you all these, different pockets that we're going to be talking about. So now to start, inshallah. Of course, in our time, social media portrays that, the relationship between a boy and a girl is all about romance, some feeling of excitement. It's a mystery associated with love, and some feelings that basically are developing between a boy and a girl, and right now, of course, developing with even same sex, unfortunately. But that is basically seen from an evolutionist as, well, this is because we were they won't consider created, but they would consider that we evolved from animals, and that animals, part of their stages in development, in order to basically continue in nature, this is what they'll do. They'll basically say that nature, as being basically God, gave, in order to continue that reproduction in animals and also human beings, that there was this type of a feeling that once they reach a certain stage of development, called the age of puberty, that's when they start having an attraction to basically the opposite sex, in order to have of course, that reproduction, and make family, etc., and then mate and move on, and so forth. So then, of course, for an evolutionist, they would see that this romance is really part of this stage of feeling that attraction, that it basically starts to select what is the right mating partner in order to reproduce. Okay. And certainly for, just on a side, there was this, just completely side thing, a very famous, his name is Abdul Wahab al-Masiri. Abdul Wahhab al-Masiri is an Egyptian scholar and an activist as well, was probably one of the most important figures that exposed postmodernism and Zionism. In fact, he wrote an encyclopedia on Zionism. It's in huge, and I mean huge. Like A4, that like the like uh the whole big, it's not A4 because A4 is a smaller one. It's, I think, of the A3, the larger papers, and yeah, huge encyclopedia. It's in 7 volumes, just about Zionism, just about Zionism. When I was in Palestine, I used to work in the library, and the library that I worked in, they basically had bought the Encyclopedia of Zionism and put it, that we just put it on our shelves. The Israeli government, they basically knew that we had the Zionist encyclopedia, so they called the librarian, like the manager, they called him for basically like questioning, like they basically called him to what is called an eshle, which basically means the police, the the police basically department, in order to investigate why they got that encyclopedia, and and why they put it on the library shelves. This is how I guess Israel would say that this encyclopedia is so thorough and that it exposes Israel to the core. So they then asked him to take it off the shelves. And certainly we had to take it off the shelves. It's not on the shelves anymore. Okay. Now, Abdul Wahhab al-Masiri, he was a communist. Okay. And when he was a communist, he was very anti-Islam. And certainly a communist at the time, at least, meant to be an atheist. And the core idea of atheism is there's no God, there is nothing to be called right and wrong, and everything is just plain matter in motion. Everything, hey, it's just matter, it's just things moving around and just in motion, all of that. And he basically adopted this whole idea that everything is matter in motion, there's no truth and none of that. But there's one thing that got him out of atheism and got him out of communism. That was romance. He fell in love with a girl. When he fell in love with that girl, he was a person that was always questioning everything. And he started questioning, well, what does love even mean? Why am I having these feelings? Why do I care for this person? Why do I even care that nothing would harm this girl? He got married, but then that developed from a feeling of just love to then a feeling of wanting to be a father, wanting to be protective over his basically wife, his children, all of that. And that led him to then questioning, why and what are feelings? Why and how can I explain feelings? Why do we even have these intuitions, these feelings? They're not matter in motion, but they're a very strong drive. What is that drive? What is that intuition? What is that type of inclination that I have? And he said, even when I would look into the evolutionists and they would say it's just your sexual drive waiting to mate and get it fulfilled, he said, I would still have the love there to care for this person, to care for my children, etc. That cannot be matter. It can't be matter. This is a different world. This is a different feeling. This is not matter. This is not just some kind of a chemistry and that's it. This is what led him to later become one of the most important Muslim thinkers and do an outstanding job really in bringing about the Islamic thinking in exposing atheism and exposing the culture of atheism, which is postmodernism. Remember his name, Abdul Wahab al-Masiri. Maybe I can give you a picture of him, but later on, inshallah. Okay, so Islam will then tell you that it's not necessarily just a sexual drive that's bringing in this romance and that, I guess, that drive and that inclination, male, female, but that definitely is one of it. It's not the complete thing. But Islam tells you, well, you need to channel this drive and channel this inclination towards a certain area, and therefore let this type of attraction make sure that that doesn't drive you, but you direct it, you mentor it, you guide it towards the area that leads to higher than what an animal would lead himself into. An animal would want to mate for the sake of mating, basically has this chemical thing or biochemical thing in his body, needs to mate, find a female, blah, 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 and everything's all done. And then it goes into whether it's a cycle once every year, or, once every probably, certain triggers, etc., all these different things, but that's different. Human chemistry is completely different, where it actually involves throughout the year attraction. It's not throughout basically a certain time of the year, but it's actually throughout the year. But Islam considered that you are not an animal. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُم فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ وَرَزَقْنَاهُم مِّنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ. You're not an animal, but you are basically, certainly, share certain things with animals, but you as a human being, Islam was all about making you a bashar, making you a higher level where these drives do not control you, but you channel them towards the purpose. You as a human being, you recognize that there's a purpose that preceded your existence. You recognize that there's a purpose that you live towards, and therefore, whether that drive was a sexual drive, or whether that drive was eating, or whether that drive was drinking, or whether that drive was to exist, or whether that drive was to possess, or whatever it is, all these drives are part of you. But Islam said you need to channel these drives and make sure that they go towards creating family, bringing instability, and certainly making you create this family to get to Jannah. That's the whole thing. That's the whole idea. Certainly, it's to continue the existence of mankind, but that's not enough, because you are not an animal, but you are a human being that is striving to live up to a certain purpose. Your life has a meaning. Your life is not like an animal that does not have a meaning and therefore living to be subjugated by man. You have a meaning. Then therefore, these drives, you channel them towards that meaning. So love doesn't, of course, always equal compatibility. And this is key. That when we seek love, when we seek marriage, it's not just looking at mating compatibility. And this is key. We're not looking for just mating compatibility, but we're actually looking for a compatibility that will stay for a lifelong relationship, that basically intends to go farther than this dunya and get all the way to the akhirah. So does romance really reflect what we're looking for? The answer is no. Romance in Islam is not necessarily the core of male-female relationship, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala considered وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. If you were to look at all the ayat, this is perhaps the core ayah to tell us why male, female, why this, let's call it sexual attraction. What are we supposed to get out of this whole thing? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and amongst his signs that he had created, I want you to look at a couple words here. So he said, خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. He had created from your own cells, in other words, your own souls, أزواجا, pairs, in order to find tranquility, in order to find stability, and ilayha, towards her. And he had created, and the word ja'ala is different than khalaqa. We're going to talk about that. Ja'ala bainakum, amongst you, mawaddatan and the rahma. Let me just a couple things to say. Number one, when we're talking about khalaqa, this is in order to let us know that there is a biological inclination within us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created within us. There's a biological piece that certainly male is attracted to female. There's that biological piece. Two, there's that biological piece that certainly he may have certain things that he may be attracted to. Same thing. There are certain things that she may be attracted to. But then that's not enough. But then go for that chemistry. أنفسكم. When you look at the nafs, there are certain things, it's not just a physical appearance for, of course, the biological thing, but there's also that other part, which is that chemistry. That chemistry where my nafs, their nafs, etc. That's why Islam was always focused on telling the boy and the girl. If you were to look at Surah An-Nur, the emphasis on lowering the gaze was always there. Why? Because the emphasis on lowering the gaze, your gaze is sahmun min sihami iblis. Whether you're looking at animes or looking at girls in your school or looking at pictures or whatever it is, all these different things, they're basically going to determine what wires in your brain and what triggers in your body, and certainly the drives. That's what controls the drives. Same thing for a girl. Is she looking at the guys? Is she talking about the guys, etc., etc.? Same thing. If the guys are talking about the girls, that's going to trigger certain drives. If the guys are looking at girls, the guys are talking to them, then that takes a mile farther even. And therefore, Islam basically said, well, in order to control your drive, to make sure that you're not going into an animalic drive, into you thinking of it as romance, but in reality, it's nothing but taking you into the area of acting like an animal and therefore just looking to mate. Islam wanted you to go a mile farther and not just seek a mating, I guess, a partner, but Islam wanted you to look into, well, there's that nafs piece of it. There's that chemistry. There's the nafs. What is on the inside? There's the psyche that is on the inside that creates a different type of a relationship. So there's the one, biological. Two, there's that nafs piece of it. And number three, azwaja. Is zawj is basically letting you know that, okay, there's the pair, but she has certain things that the male doesn't have, and the male has certain things that the female doesn't have, and therefore they basically would complete one another and they fuse one another in order to create this type of a relationship that when one falls, the other one completes. And this is extremely important. That's what we get out of the word azwaja. There is a hadith that's not necessarily authentic, and I know that everybody would always think of completing the other half, that it's based on a hadith and looking at marriage, that it's completing the other half. It's not actually an authentic hadith to see marriage as necessarily one half and the other half and looking for your other half. But I mean, okay, metaphorically, it's it's a nice thing. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described it as أنتم لباس هن لباس لكم وأنتم لباس لهن, that they're both garments to one another. So Islam tells you, well, this type of garment relationship, what do you get out of garments? You basically get out of a garment. Why do you wear clothes? One is to cover your aura. What is a aura? It's basically the area that you don't want others to see. It's the area that is very private to yourself. Of course, in a marriage relationship, that aura doesn't exist anymore. Number two, libas. What does a libas do? What does a garment do? It gives you warmth. In other words, that's what a marriage relationship is supposed to do. It's supposed to give you warmth. Number three, what does a libas do? A libas is basically supposed to fit your size. If you're wearing a size that's bigger than your size, you're going to see yourself tripping. You want something that fits your size. So therefore, when you look at libas, what might fit person A might not fit person B. This woman might be the right person for A, but not the right person for B. It doesn't make her bad. She just doesn't fit that person. She's just not the right compatible person. And that's the same thing. Number four or number five, when we're talking about garments, it's not just the looks of it. Well, looks is definitely one piece of why we might wear something. When we're speaking about clothes, yes, aesthetics is one piece, but it's not enough to look at aesthetics. Aesthetics gives us one thing, but usually these very fancy clothes are usually not the most comfortable. We all know that. Those are very nice clothes, but guess what? They're not the most comfortable clothes. And certainly, especially if you're talking about shoes, the most fancy shoes are usually not the most comfortable shoes. Okay. Now, the other reason for clothing is basically to sometimes assign our roles. You would basically go to perhaps maybe a doctor's office. You would see the doctors dressed in a certain clothing. The scrubs are probably for surgeons and probably for nurses, etc. And certain colors are, they're basically just distributed. And that's one thing, is that sometimes the clothing itself is basically to help us define and know our roles in order to make our institution easier to function and let us identify one another. So having that being said, when you look at this demonstration of clothes in the ayah continues, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. What is لِتَسْكُنُوا? لِتَسْكُنُوا means in order for you to find stability, in order for you to find tranquility, in order for you to find sukoon. What is sukoon? Sukoon is the opposite of being in motion. Sukoon is the opposite of being in motion. So when you say something is the opposite of being in motion, in other words, when you are not married, there's a certain drive that is active. This drive that is active is also making your mind basically in a state of being active, and at the same time, your behavior is also probably not stable, and it's getting you into this type of activity that sometimes definitely impulsive in different ways. But marriage creates maturity, because maturity is about being less in a way, in less activity, but in an organized activity. That's what maturity is. You're managing your activity towards going to a purpose. You're not impulsive. You're actually having this activity, whether it's brain activity, whether it's sexual, or whether it's financial, or whether it's social, all of it is going towards a managed type of an activity. It's going towards an institution. It's going towards a certain purpose. and not just any activity, money wandering around and perhaps maybe if we're talking about our own activity, going outside to hang out, etc. But when you're married, no, you don't have that much time to hang out. You don't have that much time to play games. You don't have that much time to wander money because you've got a certain responsibility. You probably have your children. You need to pick them up, drop them off at school. You need to probably teach them. You need to your money. You can't wandering around. You can't always dine out because you need to do money management, or else you're going to be behind with your bills. You're going to be behind with probably what is more important, etc. So now we're seeing that it manages, it creates a certain level of management, and takes away the impulsivity, takes away the type of activism that is not controlled. So when we're talking about sukoon, we're talking about stability, we're talking about organization, we're talking about direction, we're talking about less impulsive. That's litaskunu. So in other words, one thing we could say out of all this inference is one of the solutions to a lot of the teenage problems that are rising is really marriage. We're delaying marriage and thinking that, oh, we need to delay marriage because they're not yet mature enough. One of the things that can contribute to getting them mature is actually marriage. Because when you look at the word litaskunu, that's another word for maturity. That's another word for maturity. It's to control your impulsive drives in order for them to be directed to a certain purpose. That's litaskunu. So one thing that we need to encourage is marriage. So this boy, for example, will start, hey, you want to get married? I don't mind. Yeah, why not? Let's work towards that. So he will work to make money and feel that I'm going to make this money I need to save it in order for me to basically have enough money to get married, to build a home, to fund my family, my future family, etc. So now what are we looking at? We're going to then see this boy, instead of being dependent on the mother and the father and him acting like a young teenager and just basically going around and just wanting to get more of entertainment. No, this person is now directing his own activity in a way where it's going towards a certain purpose. لتسكنوا إليها. Why إليها and not معها? So when you say ilma, ma actually means with, but إليها actually means towards them. You know, it's quite sad that many times women would, and especially during our times, they would say that men are just looking for a woman to be their mommy. Part of that is true. Part of that is part of their nature. That's what we get out of ilayha. That's what we get out of ilayha. That there's a certain relationship. When the boy is born, the first relationship he has with his mother is a relationship that she's my place of food. She's my place of security. She's my place of warmth. She's my place of affection. She's my place of comfort. Now, the child, boy or girl, this is what they see in their mother. Then when the child grows to basically develop certain feelings and certain, let's say, certain things that would basically develop at the age of puberty, then certainly they're going to seek a woman that is right now not replacing their mother, but would have a dual relationship of a wife and also a place of a mother as well. And this is extremely important to keep in mind. So ladies, it is true, but there's nothing wrong about that. To basically act as the woman that gives affection, the woman that gives care, the woman that gives mercy, the woman, and that's why you see in that ayah continuing, جَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. جَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. What is المودة? المودة is deeper than love. Because when you look at love, it's a certain chemistry, it's a certain thing, but it actually goes in mawadda, and that is basically involving affection. I care for my husband, or the husband cares for his wife at a deeper level than just me fulfilling my drive and she fulfills her drive, etc. No, it's a deeper level. This level is where we both would jointly work towards a purpose that we feel attached to, which is our own family, which are our own children. And that is not separate from putting that rahmah. Now, mawaddatan wa rahmah, it goes both ways. So لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا was certainly there to tell us that, there's a certain feeling that the man is looking for, but that doesn't mean that the woman is not looking for that either. The woman is also looking for a level of sukoon, but for a woman, what she looks in a man is more security, is more safety. And we see that even in animals, that the bird makes this nest and he works really hard to make this nest. The girl bird or the female bird comes in and starts investigating the nest. You still need to work harder. So then he starts working harder and harder. Another female investigates whether this is basically good enough for her future babies and whether she is going to be basically the woman to be there to take care of his babies, and whether he is man enough to keep the place secure, and basically he would build the nest and so forth. And of course, the same thing when we would look at human nature, that she's looking for a man that is strong, that is capable, that is fit, that is intelligent. And guess what? What a female looks for is different than what a male looks for. A female looks for somebody that is smarter than her, somebody that is fitter than her, is somebody that is stronger in all ways, because she sees that being manly is to give her more security. But the man, he's not necessarily looking for just a woman that is stronger or a woman that is weaker. He's not looking for somebody that is weaker at all. If you were to look at those studies, what do men look for in a woman, and what does a woman look for in a man? We're not talking about drives here. We're not talking about drives here, but we're talking about what are they attracted to. You will see that what the surveys are saying is that women are looking for guys that are basically tall, guys that have very strong features to basically look manly, an athlete, workout, an athlete, etc., educated, make money, and definitely own a car, definitely if they are capable of owning a house. So you would say ugly rich men can even find a girl that is probably young, beautiful, etc., and basically the girl would basically find him attractive. Well, is it him or his money that was attractive? It's basically both, because she would say that he's got the evidence to prove that he's capable of securing my future children. If you were to look at a man and what he looks for, certainly men are, I would say, oftentimes women are more intelligent in their selection. Sorry, guys, but women are more intelligent in their selection than boys. Boys tend to find selections and tend to look for selections for basically mating, but women tend to look for selections that care for their babies, that are mature to be basically the place of security. Men usually look for, a woman that is about 5'7", 5'8" in height, if they're basically tall enough to have that. Okay. And looking for certain features, you know what I mean? I mean, we see it all over basically the 5'6", 5'7", 5'8", within the height, the taller end, and we would say that they're looking for certain features that basically represent one. If you were to look at a bus, for example, hey, expecting to give more, at least for the children, and of course, even though that has nothing to do with reality, because just because we're seeing certain features, that does not mean that represents a better food quality or whatever it is, okay, for the children. And you know what I mean. Sorry, you know what I mean. And same thing if we're talking about other features, but we had seen studies that actually show a resemblance between the body feature and the health feature of reproduction. So women, for example, with certain physical features, they tend to be more fertile. Women with certain physical features, they tend to be healthier, at least in their fertility, and therefore they're more likely to be chosen by men. Ironically, you could say, subhanAllah, subhanahu wa ta'ala created certain things in nature. Same thing when women would look at certain features in men, certain features, they did actually see a relationship between these selected features and fertility as well. I'm not going to get into that, but when we look at these features, certainly there's a biological factor, but there's also another piece that women tend to like more in that nafs. Certainly the type of nafs that is somewhat a man, usually a man showing authority, not to the level of authoritative to mean dictatorship, but showing type of power. So they will basically get attracted to men that show power, whether it's physical power or whether it's power in their behavior, etc. And number two, versus if you were to look at men, they would look for more women that are, let's call them, feminine, easy, smiley, happy, showing these kind of features, which we would look at the hadith, إِذَا نَظَرَ إِلَيْهَا سَرَّتْ. When he looks at her, she makes him feel happy. Why? Because she's resembling a happy personality. And when he would basically look at her features, he's all dressed up, attractive, etc. Look at showing these, I guess, these features of, attraction. You know what I mean? And certainly, and when he orders her, she obeys him. So in other words, you could see that the hadith themselves are letting us know that there's a chemistry that even for the man, he feels that he's not going to be challenged, that he is God, a certain area of what he considers as his kingdom territory, and therefore he wants a companion that is working along with him within this territory and not challenging him. And this is extremely important. When you look at لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, it's basically letting us learn about this chemistry, that he's basically seeking a place to have this type of tranquility, to have this type of that relationship. Sukoon, calmness, there's a certain territory, there's a certain place of masculinity, there's a certain place of femininehood. What are those? We're going to talk about those at the end. But just letting us know that mawadda, rahma, sukoon, zawaj, all of that is basically important in order to make, before you even get into marriage, that this is what you're looking for. So Islam tells you, you need to look beyond a mating idea of what you're looking for in a relationship to a relationship that gives you sukoon, that gives you the companionship, that gives you the mawadda, that gives you the rahma. And when you look at the word ja'ala, the word ja'ala is letting you know, ja'ala baynakum mawaddatan wa rahma, is letting you know that the word ja'ala is different than khalaqa. Khalaqa means, well, it was created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was the one that created it. But ja'ala, that there is a chemistry, there are these factors that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. Now it's your responsibility to make those factors work towards building building basically that purpose. What does that look like? So when you look at the word ja'ala, in other words, there are these factors, but these factors, they are to be molded by you. Therefore, successful marriages are not khalaqa, are not makhluq, but they're basically within ja'ala area. What's the difference? Successful marriages are not born successful marriages. They're made. You make this a successful marriage. You contribute to make this a successful marriage. That's why he said ja'ala. There are certain factors that you have to either, whether it's compromise or whether it's work towards or whether it's contribute or whether it's probably put an effort in, all of these different things, that's for you to basically work on that ja'ala piece of it. Now, this is extremely important because we may sometimes confuse marriages and think of it, oh, it was born to be successful. But no, you make it successful. You don't, it is not born successful, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had certain features that you need to work towards making it happen. Now, here's one thing. True love is not when these teenage boys and girls, they show some attraction and they're living in this type of a relationship where it's basically certain feelings firing. Those are fake feelings, to be honest. Why? Because those feelings are fake feelings once they're more of that fiery feeling of lust. And once that gets turned off, and once that is fulfilled, that's when things and that chemistry basically goes away and starts fading away. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let us know in that ayah, the ayah before it, that لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا جَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, that's basically the chemistry, the aim, the goal that you want to live up to in order to make sure that you basically develop these sentiments, that you give care, that you give that affection, that you give that mercy, that you don't work towards one another as if you were in a battlefield, because the second that you see him as your counterpart and as the one that is challenging you with that mindset, you had just put the death sentence in this marriage. If the man sees the woman that she's basically challenging him and challenging him on power or whatever it is, and she's seeing him that, oh, he's trying to eliminate my power, it's all about all of that, then this is a death sentence. Once we live with this mindset that, oh, they're just trying to take away my power, then you just put a death sentence in that relationship, in marriage, or even your parents. Oh, she's trying to be controlling. She's just trying to somehow, feed her ego, or he's trying to feed his ego, or etc. That's a death sentence right there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically let us know that this type of kibr, this type of arrogance, is one ingredient that if it goes into that relationship, or what we would today call a narcissist, if it goes within the relationship, that arrogance, and I don't want to feed his ego and all of these different things that they might say. Once it goes inside, it acts as the venom that with time, it just kills the relationship. With time, it kills the relationship. And we'll talk about certain attitudes, I'll just call them attitudes, that I can anticipate and tell you 1, 2, 3 attitudes. If they are in a relationship, this isn't gonna be pleasant. This isn't gonna go far. All right. True love comes after showing commitment. That commitment is what brings in longevity in that relationship. Willing to live with the principle rather than your selfishness. And these are very important things to talk about, because once that person is living in that selfish attitude, they come first. They are the center. That's when you can guarantee that this relationship is not going to last long, and that this relationship is building its own death sentence right there. The venom that will then be fatal to this relationship. Selfishness is one of them. Selfishness, whether in intimacy, selfishness in how we would even understand when somebody is, yes, this woman, for example, that day, yes, she's supposed to be cleaning the house, washing dishes, whatever, but that day she had her period, she wasn't feeling good, or she's basically going through mood swings because of maybe her period or whatever it is that is happening. And therefore, I have to understand as a man that she's right now not her normal self. And therefore, I have to contain the situation. Same thing for a woman, that he probably had a bad day at work or something like that. And for her to just say, I guess he's just not having a good day, and therefore I'll just contain it and just dismiss it. And I don't have to comment about his attitude on that day. I'll just dismiss it like it's just one of those bad days. That actually is living the principle of mawadda and rahma, living the principle of affection, living the principle of understanding, and having that moment that I also go through these bad days, and there are those bad days that he would come in with his mercy and probably take over the kids and probably do what is necessary. And the same thing, when he's probably, maybe his mind is all fixated, or probably just all thinking about one problem that he probably had with maybe an employee or probably a coworker, etc., that I would not be selfish, but I would understand his feelings, I would understand his circumstances, and I would understand basically these moments in order to contain one another. When I say contain, that word contain is the word libas that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had described in the other ayah. That's the word libas. Libas is what contains you. Libas is what basically covers your aura. What is the aura? It's basically the ugliest part of you. It's the area that you don't want anybody to see. It's the area that basically is basically what would get the things that would have the disgusting smell, what would have the disgusting things that are the body basically relieving, the body exiting, etc. It's basically that area that you don't want anybody to see because you want to stay with your dignity. So when you say اللباس, it's also to let us know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling marriage and marriage relationship as a libas, that we would cover each other's awra. We would cover those areas when we might have had our shortcomings. We don't go expose them. We don't go expose them and basically start talking about them to people because we're angry at our partner. We don't go expose them, not to even to our family members, because that would only be a munafiq that would do that. The Prophet ﷺ had described al-munafiq إِذَا خَاصَمَ فَجَرَ, that whenever they go in khusuma. What is al-khusuma? Al-khusuma is any tension. I'm angry at that person, so then therefore whatever harms them, I'm going to do. Whatever harms them, I'm going to do. That's khasama fajr. If it harms them to tell about them, I'm going to do it. If it harms them to probably get them unemployed, I'm going to work towards that. If it harms them to basically get them into an unrest psychologically, I'm going to do that. If it harms them for me to tell their friends about them, I'm going to tell about their friends about them. If it harms them to talk about them on social media, I'm going to do it. This is إذا خاصم فجر. That's a munafiq. That's a munafiq. And Allah al-Musta'an. Right now, this إذا خاصم فجر, إذا خاصم فجر, this is right now, we're seeing it on and on and on. When they are angry at a person, they'll go exposing them in school, exposing them perhaps on social media, exposing them socially, harming them financially, whatever it takes. That's a munafiq. Il-munafiq إذا خاصم فجر. And this is extremely dangerous. And if that person is categorized as a munafiq, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes al-munafiqeen fi darki al-asfali min an-nar. They're at the lowest end in hellfire. And Allah al-Musta'an, we're seeing that very often during our times. She's angry or he's angry, and then they go exposing each other on social media. And then we're seeing the children later basically taking in these behaviors and applying it in their relationship as well. And in the future, they become exposing each other, the siblings exposing one another and all of that, when the home is all about a place of secrecy. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually calls the woman حافظات للغيب, for a good woman. Why did he emphasize حافظات للغيب? That's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to tell us that women, and many women, have the tendency to expose when they're in pain, to expose when they're not comfortable with something, but that does not mean that they have the right to do that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, حافظات للغيب. Even during those moments when things may go wrong, when they are not content about something, they would still be حافظات للغيب. They would preserve all that unseen information that was exposed only to her, but she would basically conceal it and not expose it. That's حافظات للغيب. And that's something that we need to teach our children at home. What happens at home, what your siblings had done, what your mother and father, and what kind of disputes they go into. This is supposed to be privacy for us. This is supposed to be our place of security. This is not to be talked about to nobody. And therefore, this is to preserve your honor as well. Why your honor? What is that involving? Because the second that you continuously share your own weaknesses or your own pains, you become vulnerable to many predators out there. You had basically given the zip code of what you are, that you are a vulnerable person, and it was an easy target for many. And therefore, the predators looking for victims like you, looking for people to prey on like you become that destination. You become that center. That's one side. The other side is you creating a profile of yourself called the profile that I'm weak, I'm vulnerable. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching us in numerous ayat, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. I complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is al-bath? Al-bath is basically all those sentiments that you might have on the inside. Al-huzn is the sorrow, the direct relationship. Al-bath could not mean, hey, my mom and dad, for example, not me personally, but maybe certain things were going on at home and it affected you. It harmed you until now. Maybe you didn't express it to anyone, but it's still there. You never express it to anyone. This is al-bath. Al-huzn, it's a direct relationship. Mom and dad got divorced, and as a child, I had to basically live between these two adults that are at each other's necks. So therefore, I grew up as a person that is not myself, but grew up as a person that is always afraid of getting married, because I thought that, hey, every husband or every man is going to be basically doing the same thing that I had seen my father do or my mother do or whatever it is. And then I end up creating these sentiments of a phobia or whatever it is. Now, this is one thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us learn إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ, and also فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانِ. Sabr al-jameel. What is a sabr? A sabr is when you contain your sentiments. You don't let your sentiments get exposed out there, but you contain them. That's a sabr. There's no way to live in any form of success unless you learn how to live a sabr, how to contain your pains. That's a sabr. فَصَبْرٌ jameel. What is a sabr al-jameel? Sabr al-jameel is when you learn how to contain those moments when things didn't go as you had wanted them to go, but then those sentiments of probably feeling broken, feeling challenged, feeling in pain, etc., you basically don't complain about them. That's why it's called jameel, because to complain about them contradicts sabr. Wallahu al-musta'an. But you seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because you recognize that even if you had exposed all these different things, that those people are as vulnerable as perhaps you were at one point. But you recognize that Allahul Musta'an. I seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He is the one to basically grant me justice or grant me right or grant me stability or grant me basically the way to becoming successful in my relationship. Okay, now to ensure that relationships are not impulsive and certainly having these temporary emotions channel them or basically control them, Islam recommends looking for descriptions that make these relationships last longer. So the Prophet ﷺ, let's look into all these different ahadith. The Prophet ﷺ, let's look at the first one. إِذَا أَتَاكُم مَّن تَرْضَوْنَ دِينَهُ وَخُلُقَهُ فَزَوِّجُوهُ إِلَّا تَفْعَلُوا تَكُن فِتْنَةٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَسَادٌ عَرِيضٌ. The Prophet ﷺ basically said, if you get a proposal of a person that has good mannerisms and good deen, then get them married. So that's number one. It's basically good mannerisms, good deen. But I want you to look at the word al-khuluq. What is al-khuluq? Al-khuluq is different than al-khalq. Al-khalq is the outer appearance. This person tall, this person short, this person blue-eyed, this person green-eyed, this person, coarse hair, this person soft hair, this person, that's the outer feature. The inner feature is called khuluq. Al-khalq is the outer, the khuluq is the inner feature. What's the inner feature? This person is kind. This person is giving. This person is forgiving. This person is affectionate. This person is funny. This is an inner khuluq. So when you look at inner khuluq, how do we know what this person is like on the inside? That's why you look at a couple things. Number one, we would look at their tongue. The way a person speaks is the first barid, is the first labeling that you're going to look into to know the truth about this person and what they really are. That is the khuluq. Al-khuluq is basically the inner feature. The inner feature that we would study and we would know by looking at their tongue. How do they speak? The tone. What does it sound like? All of that is going to give me a huge address and the area for me to know what this person's akhlaq are. Two, the behavior in how they deal with the people around them. What type of relationship? How do they deal with one another? Do they consider other people's feelings? Do they consider their own feelings as basically the center? One thing is that each and every single one of us is built around their own selfish interest. There's a selfish being inside each and every single one of us. And I have an ayah to prove it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأُحْضِرَتِ الْأَنفُسُ الشُّحَّ. Simple, straightforward. The ayah is saying that it is part of your nafs that there is shuh. What is a shuh? It's self-centricity. It's caring for your interest beyond more than others' interests. That's al-anfus, nafs. Only a person that had worked towards going beyond this nafs is a person that worked on their deen and learned how to become. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Why? He called him Halim. That's al-Hilm. And that's a very rare thing. Al-Hilm is when you don't just regard your own self and your own feelings and your own pains as what really matters. But al-Hilm, you would dismiss even when people had wronged you. That's al-Hilm. That's a person that had developed, let's call it, a behavior that is beyond human behavior. In nafs is human behavior, but this is malaiki. This is more like an angel behavior. When a person basically goes beyond the normal behavior that it's all me, that I fight to feed my area of territory, that's animal. Human learns how to share. Human learns how to care. Human learns how to be considerate over others' pains. That's human. But, of course, when we're looking at human, can go into the downfall of being like an animal and therefore no khuluq, no principle. What khuluq is there? There's only one khuluq, which is me as the center. Me, as long as I survive, even if everyone dies, the hell with them. That's animal. And that's why we would say that even animals can sometimes develop akhlaq of rahmah, and especially the mothers. Then, when we're looking at another khuluq, that is another khuluq, the farther you go away from the animal akhlaq, that's when you get closer to bashar, to humans. And then the more you go even away from bashar and human akhlaq to like angel akhlaq, that comes with a lot of sabr. That's why we're asked to discipline our akhlaq by making more fasting, more siyam. Why? Because the more you feed your body, the more you become selfish, the more you start behaving like an animal. The less you feed your body, the more you go into fasting, the more you discipline yourself on how to give others and how to go beyond the pain and not let your desire and your drives control you, but you live up to the principle. That's why for Salihin, Da'bu Salihin, a very important feature to look into Salihin, one, whether it's their commitment on deen or whether it's their commitment on patience. When you look at al-akhlaq are basically based on 4 elements. 1, patience, sabr. 2, or let me call it first, justice, knowing justice. Number 2, sabr. Number 3, iffa. And number 4 is courage. Let's talk, or shaja'a. Let's look let me translate the 4 in English. Number 1 is knowing justice. Number 2, living patience. In other words, despite the pain. Number 3 is iffa, which basically means despite the offerings, despite things being available. Yes, it's available for you to turn on the laptop, but my mom told me not to turn it on. I would have the iffa, the commitment, even though I can probably sneak, but I will have the iffa to abide by the commitment. That's the 3rd khuluq. Right? Right. Now, number 4 is basically the khuluq of shaja'a. Once you master recognizing justice, living the patience and enduring pain no matter what the cost is, and living despite the availability of probably being able to sneak, but you live the principle, then you'll develop another feeling. And that's the feeling of noble people. The courage. That's the noble feeling that only very strong knights would have, and very strong mu'mineen would have. Shaja'a, even if their life was at risk, they're not going to give up on the principle. That's the khuluq that you would want. That's the khuluq that the Prophet ﷺ had emphasized. إذا أتاكم من ترضون دينه خلقه ودينه. The khuluq. Is he a person of recognizing justice, whether through theory or whether living it on ground? Because if he doesn't recognize justice and he's a selfish person, you're going to ask his friends to make sure that he's a person that recognizes justice. 2, is he enduring patience, or was he always entitled, a mama's boy? Or same thing, was she always having her room dirty and her place dirty and always expects mom to basically clean the dishes and clean the house, and that she comes in and everything is basically is basically supposed to be that way, and not recognize that, hey, where are you in all of this? Is sabr is key to knowing that, hey, you need to live and endure a certain level of pain in order to be a person that is willing to live up to that commitment when the marriage basically is struggling to live up to that level of success. So what do? You basically test their patience. I don't mean testing their patience by putting sugar in their or salt in their cup of coffee. No, that's silly. Well, that's not patience. You test the person's patience by asking about their history, their work ethics, their work history, their commitment in school, their commitment and the way they would deal with their parents. Is it whenever they probably angry at their mother? Are they yelling at their mom and they're willing to trespass their boundaries? If that's how they are with their mother, then know that that's how they're going to be with you as well. If that's how they are with their sister, then you are a woman as well. And they're going to abuse your weakness the way that they abuse their sister's weakness. Then in that situation, that's not a person of sabr. Number 4 or 3, the iffa. That's al-khuluq. Khuluq al-iffa is key. Are they willing to give up on the principle whenever there's an opportunity to give up on it? Or are they willing, no matter the price, they will still stick to the principle no matter the price that might be offered? That's a person of akhlaq. And that courage, that is what builds a man and builds a woman, no matter what the cost is. Even if my life and even if my wealth and no matter what it is, I will live up to the principle no matter the pain, no matter the risk. That's the courage. Ad-Din is not separate from al-akhlaq, but the Prophet ﷺ wanted to emphasize on the Deen and on the akhlaq in order for us to recognize where we need to contribute all these areas. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِهِ. The best of you are the ones that are best to their own family members. خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِهِ. Their family members, whether we're speaking about wife or we're speaking about brother or whether we're speaking about sister, you would be the best person if you are the best to your family, because that is the training. That's the training. When you are very good with your brother, when you are very good with your sister, when you are very good with your mother, that is going to basically then channel these mannerisms and this discipline, that you would basically be a person that is good with your wife, good with your children, good with your co-workers, good with the family and the bigger family, which is the community outside. So khayrukum li ahli. The Prophet ﷺ said the best of you are the ones that are best with their family. In other words, not the ones that act professionally outside, but when we're speaking about family members, what are they doing? They're basically nothing but demons and narcissists at home. That's not the akhlaq. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, there's a certain ma'ruf, there's a certain principle, piety. Just like you want them to act in piety, you should abide by that too. There's a certain level of piety that we would basically both demonstrate this ma'ruf, this level of piety together. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop right here, okay? But I'm going to leave room for questions and answers. We still have a lot to say, but down the road, we're not going to stay that long. This was just a prelude, okay, for what we wanted to do in terms of these slides. But stay tuned, inshallah. This will be extremely beneficial, especially let's look into those slides that we're going to get to, inshallah. Let me get out of this slide right here, especially once we get into these slides right there. Where are they? These slides right there. That's when, you're really going to see, inshallah, a very, very important thing to discuss, because it's going to help us organize how we see our relationship and how we see our priorities. And because remember, sometimes when we have so many tasks, we're confused. What should I consider first? What is the most important thing? So stay tuned, inshallah. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to listen to the questions or even suggestions or, something that you would like to share. I'd love to hear it, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, we didn't get internet interruption like yesterday. Subhanallah, yesterday it was just not happy. And there we go. If there are any questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourselves. No one? Okay, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna stop the